We are back, and boy do we have a humdinger for you today. In a first of its kind for the FM Immortal channel, and potentially just a first of its kind, we're going to deep dive into 6 common problems at elite football clubs, validating our assessments with full season real world data, and explaining and complementing our arguments and analyses by harnessing the mighty power of Football Manager. We are aiming to answer one massive question. Were Chelsea right to sack Mauricio Pochettino? There are loads of stats and tips that we think will make you a better football manager in this one, with 1 or 2 key metrics that we think carry huge importance for beating FM24. We had a lot of fun playing the analyst role in this one, so we hope that you can enjoy it as well. Let us know if you'd like to see us do more of this sort of thing down in the comments. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Well, our idea is to delve into these key areas of modern football and pick apart the following hypotheses. Firstly, if we can prove that Chelsea's poorer results throughout the course of the season could be attributed to a lack of motivation or ineffective tactical decisions, then we will conclude that Poch was, for all of his sensibility and principles, at fault. However, if we can attribute the poor form to injuries or recruitment, we'll be recommending that Todd Bowley follows this channel for a better read on Wonder Kids than, James Corden might recommend. But this doesn't necessarily get Poch off the hook either. Lastly then, if it's experience or team cohesion that could be to blame, then we'd have had backed Pochettino when he said about 412 times that he probably needs more time. Starting with motivation then, and short of us publishing a dissertation on motivation models or tapping into Chelsea Football Club's end-of-year staff surveys, we're turning instead to a blend of behavioural proxies that we think can shed some light onto whether or not Poch got the team really trying this season. And as we go through each of these deep dive areas, we're going to be putting a point for Poch in on the left or a point for Poch out on the right as we approach our final conclusion. Now we're going to start out with old familiar when it comes to metrics in Football Manager, and it's the XG table. So we're actually using understat.com. Other XG table websites are probably available, and we have no affiliation with this website in particular. We just like the way that it looks. And the thing that jumps out to us immediately with this one actually is that Chelsea basically finished where they ought to finish this year, in 6th, with only 1.2 points off their expected points, which wouldn't have mattered really either way. So there was no outperformance or underperformance from the expected points matrix this year for them. But XG isn't perfect. It doesn't necessarily translate to total performance. Any Football Manager connoisseur out there can tell you that you don't score any XG points if your goal is ruled out for offside, or if VAR have disallowed it for any other reason. So if you are dominating a match, putting the ball in the net 3 or 4 times, but getting that ruled out 3 or 4 times as well, then your XG is not going to budge. So it's not the be-all and end-all, is what I'm trying to say. But it is good to see, I suppose, that Chelsea kind of finished where they should have finished in 6th place. So from a motivation point of view, we can't really mark against Pochettino for the XG table output. What we are going to do, though, agnostic of motivation, is call out the fact that the win percentage is unacceptable. So to have 20 matches out of 38 not won, and that below 50% win rate, that is going to be a mark against Pochettino at some point today, so we'll score it up now. But then we're going to move on to a much more positive story, and that is to look at the zones of control. So this is a publication from theanalyst.com, which is part of the Opta framework, and they have got this magnificent visualization of all of the areas of the pitch that were in control for 55% or more of total touches on match averages. So you can see patterns emerging here from the big 6. I say the big 6. Arsenal Brighton, Chelsea, Liverpool, Man City and Spurs all had really good control of the total pitch, barring the penalty area of the opposition. So Chelsea in very good company there, maybe less so on the outskirts of the box actually, and the left wing back position, which is perhaps Chelsea's weakest spot actually. We're going to mark Poch up 1 point here because they're not too dissimilar to the Arsenal framework, so you can draw parallels there. But we talked about these areas of the pitch here, which if I highlight over, you can see where Chelsea's percentage were against the rest. Again, really similar numbers coming through for Chelsea and Arsenal here actually. But what does it mean for how progressive Chelsea were on the ball? Let me change my window here, and we're going to go back to Old Faithful, and that is Microsoft Excel, where I have pulled in stats from the Premier League website for total touches, and FBref, which is another stat site. Again, others are available, but this one helped me pull in shot creating actions per 90. And this is going to be another mark against for Pochettino, as even though Chelsea had the 5th most touches in the Premier League this season, behind City, Brighton, Liverpool and Spurs, their shot creating actions were actually 8th. So they were behind then the likes of United and Newcastle, as well as those top 4 and Arsenal. So you can see that Chelsea actually per 90 had 17 more touches per game than Arsenal. However, in terms of shot creating actions, 5 fewer led to actual going forwards, so they weren't progressive on the ball. So Pochettino certainly had his side getting involved this year, but perhaps not in the most progressive way. He had good pitch coverage in terms of zones of control, but again, it didn't translate to expected points. So we're probably going to give Poch the benefit of the doubt for motivation here, but he is in deficit because of that win rate that we spoke about earlier. His side was certainly trying, but just not trying the right things, and overall we'll balance the Poch in and Poch out score for motivation as we move into talking about squad experience. Now, most of you will remember Alan Hansen's famous line from the 90s, "You can't win anything with kids." And whilst we've argued that very case when it comes to needing some form of experience within your squad in FM, it's safe to say that in reality we are seeing younger and younger starting 11s, breaking records left, right and centre in the Premier League and even international tourneys nowadays. And Chelsea are no exception from this trend. In fact, they fielded on average the youngest Premier League starting 11 in history, in spite of the fact that Thiago Silva, who was alive when the last pterodactyl died, featured in nearly 82% of Chelsea's games this year. So what would Football Manager say about Chelsea's squad experience? Okay, so for this bit we're jumping straight into FM24. We've just simulated the first season as Chelsea. We used the in-game editor to make sure we were unsackable. And we've got 149 emails to read. Let's clear those, I'm not reading that. And yeah, actually, very, very surprisingly, we were halfway through the season and not doing all that well. I looked at the Dynamics tab and my managerial support was understandably low. I wasn't actually attending the matches, so you can expect that. But we turned it around. We actually finished exactly where Chelsea finished, on exactly the same points this season. So kudos to FM24 there for their simulation accuracy. City were the champions, Villa were third. I don't think there's too much differentiation between, Brighton, Tottenham, Newcastle as well from their actual finishing positions. So overall, other than a little bit of Man United outperformance and Arsenal underperformance, FM has basically hit the nail on the head this season. So really happy with that. We're now in the summer where we're probably going to do a rebuild video from this as well. But yeah, this is where we're going to begin looking at experience. And to do that, we're again going to go into the squad planner. So Experience Matrix in Squad Planner is a fantastic way of learning exactly where you are at with your FM saves and where your deficit is. So it splits it into 4 chunks. You get development players, emerging players, peak talent, and then experienced players, who are your kind of very traditional captains. So we've got 17 players in emerging talents, most of which look like they are important players, which is that purple colouring. We've got 2 squad depth players and 2 youth players in development, 4 important players in their peak, and 1 important and 1 squad player in the experience column. And what we're going to do now is we're going to compare that with the champions Manchester City. And as you can see immediately jumping off the screen, this is at the start of the season. I haven't bothered simulating it again for the Man City case, but you've got 4 players of squad depth standard in development, including Guardiola, who is just, in development, my arse. But then you've got emerging talents, emerging like Haaland, who's obviously been banging them in for years already. Phil Foden, who had the best season of his life. Cole Palmer is technically still there because we're at the start of the season here for Man City, so we should probably get rid of him. So yeah, we have 4 there, 3 here, and then woof, we've got so many more peak players. So players at the absolute top of their game. We've got 8 squad players and 6 important players, with 3 players then taking up that experienced mantle. Ultimately, it looks like Chelsea squad is full of emerging talents, Man City squad is full of peak talents. That is the big difference here. So getting back into Chelsea then, let's have a look at where we think they are in terms of squad dynamics. Not in our simulation, but in real life. Now, it's 3 really important parts of team performance in Football Manager, and that is why we're going to use this as an example as we talk through Pochettino's first season. So in terms of team cohesion then, where we'd be placing this dial is actually a little bit under average. So average being the very dead centre, we think that Chelsea are probably around here. About 2 ticks left, if you will. Club atmosphere, I don't think it ended too poorly, but there were certainly some really rocky moments throughout this season where you saw squabbling on the pitch. It didn't feel like the team were particularly gelled. I think in the aftermath of the Pochettino sacking, you'll have seen though that the players and the majority of the squad had the backing of the manager and vice versa. So managerial support, I think, would be actually good. I think that's probably quite a fair reflection. And the reason I think I'm talking about happiness and player morale is that for the most part then, what Pochettino will be looking at if he was still at the club next year is that all of these emerging talents would be still there and fighting for him, still carrying that motivation that we've spoken about, which is what you actually need as a club to perform. So we're going to notch up a couple of points here for Pochettino because we think that more time here would certainly have been what he needed. Now, we talked a little bit about cohesion there, but does on-field chemistry really play a part here? If Football Manager has taught us anything, it's that you have so many factors in place, like mentoring relationships, personalities, performance on the pitch together, and game time, of course, to get that magic green line between 2 players on the pitch, or, of course, the dreaded dotted lines forming between your 2 centre-backs. But how much game time did everyone at Chelsea actually get with each other this year? We did a bit of trawling through the ESPN website to gather data, and this one took quite a while, but produced some fascinating results. So we're back in Microsoft Excel then, and this is a spreadsheet that we actually put together ourselves, again using the ESPN website as our source of truth. And what we did was step through every single match for Chelsea. We also did the same thing for Arsenal as a comparison, mainly because we think that Arsenal are probably one of the tighter teams in the league this year who use the least amount of players. We found that Chelsea had 32 players that featured at least once this season, and then we looked at how many of those appearances were starts, how many were subs, and we used that to draw some conclusions which we'll get onto shortly. Now, in terms of cohesion then, and what this means for playing together, we've got a rule here where we've actually amounted the approximate minutes, taking 70 minutes for a start together, which is actually probably quite a conservative estimation, and 20 minutes if they made a substitute appearance. Of course, this isn't always going to be right, It took a very long time to get this data together, and I was not willing to calculate minute by minute analyses and who came off for who as well. In the interest of time, then, we drew up this cohesion matrix for Chelsea, where you can see who the two players that played most together look like. It's Conor Gallagher and Moises Caicedo are the deepest red colour there in our matrix. So yeah, we repeated that process for Arsenal. The thing that probably jumps off the page here is that, yeah, they do have a smaller squad. They only use 25 players in total compared to Chelsea's 32 in the Premier League this season. So let's have a look at the output, shall we? And this is where it becomes quite telling, we think. So, yeah, we know that difference of 7 players utilised between Chelsea and Arsenal is probably quite big, but it does mean that the average minutes between players, by our estimation, is around 170 minutes, or 2 matches more for Arsenal than it is for Chelsea. The players with more than 5 matches together, though, that number is the same for both clubs. As a percentage of the utilised players, it's a little bit worse, but that doesn't really tell much of a story. But it's when you get to players with 10 or more matches together, or 12 or more matches together, where you can see that Arsenal are a more cohesive unit. And the subs per game, I just put that one in there for later on. We're going to come back to that when we're talking tactics. But the average changes in starting 11 per game, I think, is actually significant. And if you have a look at this graph here over on the right, you could read this as how many changes were made per match. So in this case, it would be 5. This case, it would be 4. 3, 2, 1 and 0, and Arsenal fielded the same 11 on 7 occasions this season. So that is in back-to-back matches. They had an unchanged 11 7 times, and that compares to Chelsea's 3. They lead by 1 on the 1 change. They're the same on 2 changes, same on 3 changes, and then Chelsea making significant amounts of changes here, more so than Arsenal, to make up for that number at the start. So yeah, I think I have to give points to Pochettino here for cohesion as a factor, because quite frankly, Chelsea were forced into lots of changes and could not get the game time between players to make that chemistry happen. And why is it, do we think, that players were unavailable for Poch this year? Well, this one doesn't need too much of an explanation, I don't think. It is, quite frankly, injuries. If we look at the injuries from our simulated season, we actually got 54 injuries, which again is miraculously exactly the same as what Chelsea were susceptible to this year. Chelsea, total injuries 54, games missed 309. That is a fair deal higher than Newcastle, who are in second place. And significantly worse than West Ham. Look at that, 6 injuries over the total season. That's absolutely preposterous. In recent times on Football Manager, we have averaged our injuries with Marseille in the FM24 save, and we can tell you that you should expect at least 36 injuries per season. So Chelsea being kind of 50% higher than that is testament to the fact that their team is full of glass ankles. And if we actually look through who the players that were most injured were, we had Carney Chukwuemeka out for 5 months, obviously Fofana sustaining the injury from the previous season, so he's not in this list. But we'll go through the players, and you all know this by now. We always look at the medical report of players, but also the coach report, and we will always see these cons as red flags when signing players in FM. Might have problems with injuries means they absolutely bloody will have problems with injuries, and you'll very rarely go a season without a significant one. This year, of course, we've talked on many occasions about how injuries can impact your form. We've talked about the way that you can manage your schedule better, and to make sure that you haven't got training schedules that absolutely bastardise your team. Things like match practice that come straight after a game, which has been rearranged, which can end up breaking legs. Injuries have been absolutely diabolical to Chelsea this year, and so that's going to be another point for Poch in. Penultimately then, we're going to be talking about recruitment, and we are actually going to deviate our course and go and use the squad planner for one of the first times ever. So actually the squad planner is a feature that's developing out. It was first introduced in FM23, it got slightly better in FM24, but FM Immortal have always stood by the fact that pen and paper is always better. However, our strong recommendation is to visit the squad planner at the very start of a save. So once you have picked your tactical approach, it is always good to come here and specifically click this depth button, where you can see numbers that fit your positions, and then when you've got low numbers you can click in to see who exactly you have covering those positions. So there's no doubt that Todd Boehly has pumped money into Chelsea for fun in his tenure, spending I think close to £1 billion, which is absolutely ridiculous. But the fact remains that on every pundit's lips has been the criticism that Chelsea still haven't bought a striker. So this number here of 6 is very devious, because it's actually inclusive of players that are out on loan as well as players that just really aren't fitting the bill. But the fact remains that recruitment wise it hasn't been a strong case for buying the right players in. When you look at this list and you register that only one player really saw out the season as a striker, and that was Jackson. And you just have to say, where there are numbers this small, so 3 players in cover and one of them being Reece James, we had 6 players start in this position and therefore out of position for the most part, with Disasi coming in, Cucurella moving over and blooding Gilchrist. That's a sad reflection of the fact that Chelsea just haven't bought clever, and we have to mark against the recruitment team here, because we have spent an awful lot of money, but it's all been in these positions, this kind of attacking mid-right, attacking mid-left. There just hasn't been a very smart formation-based recruitment approach here. Now, one other thing you're able to do with the in-game editor here is actually add in hidden columns into this squad view. So I can go to insert and then hidden, and what I've done is put in the 2 columns of CA and PA, which stand for current ability and potential ability. Now, I've sorted this by potential ability because I wanted to flag whether or not we think the recruitment team have at least bought players that are going to transform Chelsea in the future. And if we look at the top 3 and even the top 5 of the best potential ability players at the club, you're actually probably going to be shocked to see Sterling and Silva are in there, Fofana, who hasn't played a game in over a year, in there as well, and then Caicedo, who is a good investment probably, albeit for a lot of money, and Enzo Fernandez, his midfield partner, he can't seem to get on with. They're the best 2 players that Chelsea have brought in the last 18 months. Then you go down the list slightly and you can see Nkunku and Mudryk around the 170, 172 area, so they'll be as good as Reece James could be as well. So all of this talk of Chelsea squad has got us hankering to do a summer rebuild video. So that will be the next video up on our channel. Give us a subscribe if you want to see that. But let's compare how Chelsea now look against Man City for current and potential ability, shall we? So it's not actually too much of a deficit when you look at the average current ability between these 2 clubs. 145 for Chelsea and 154 for Man City. That's only a difference of 9. And actually the potential ability is even closer when you average the full squad. 162 for Chelsea, 165 for Manchester City. Now, when you think about the calibre of talent that Manchester City have pulled in recent transfer windows, with Alvarez, who is obviously an FM22 wonder kid, Gvardiol, who was renowned as one of the best centre-back prospects in the world, promising to see that Chelsea are quite close there. But where the big difference comes in, it's the number of current ability players above that 165 mark. So a little short of where Raheem Sterling is. There are only 2 players at the club for Chelsea currently that fit the bill there, and the equivalent in Manchester City is 8, and that is a really stark difference. And when it comes to potential ability as well, we filtered on players that are 180 or above, and Chelsea only have 3 in their roster according to the FM24 scouts, whereas Manchester City have a further 6 prospects to get there. So yes, we're going to mark down the recruitment team here. We don't think it's Pochettino's fault, so it's going to be a point for Poch. Now, there's plenty more under the bonnet of recruitment that we could have looked into, like the effect of long-term contracts on young players' motivation, that salary deficit across the squad and how that might have caused unrest, and the fact that Poch didn't out-and-out request reinforcements in any position, perhaps surprisingly so for wing-backs and of course strikers, during the January transfer window. And we suspect that at this point you are thinking there's no coming back from a score like 6-2, right? It's looking like a foregone conclusion at this point that the right decision would have been to keep Poch in. Well, buckle up because it's time to pick apart the last component of this analysis, and that is Pochettino's tactics. So we put out a video not too long ago talking about when and how you should go with the plan B in FM24, and it's making us think, did Pochettino have a plan B this season? My brother in Christ, he didn't even have a plan A. Pochettino dabbled with no fewer than 11 tactical setups this year. 11. 3, 4 and 5 at the back from time to time. That's all competitions, by the way, and our source for this one was ESPN. When we were pulling in the starting 11 data for the earlier Chelsea-Arsenal comparisons, we noted that Arteta, by contrast, changed his tactical setup just twice, from a 4-3-3 to a 4-2-3-1, bog standard stuff, but boy did that system familiarity make me envious. Poch may have had his hand forced with injuries, but it took him until January really to cement that 4-2-3-1 that we saw out the season with. And if that's not an FM meme in itself, then I don't know what is. 1 point for Poch out then, due to his seeming inability to cement a tactical style. Now, we are running out of time here, so we're not going to jump back into Microsoft Excel again, but let me hit you with some other stats that we've collected. Chelsea went behind in 20 matches again this year. More than half of the games played, we conceded first. We went on to lose 11 of those matches and only turned around 5 to win from behind. Compare that with Arsenal then, who went behind only 10 times this season, that's half the amount that Chelsea did, or Liverpool, who won from behind on 13 occasions. There's just something not sitting right with me on that mentality and tactical setup, and that's going to be another point against Poch. Chelsea conceded more than they scored against the rest of the Big Six this year as well. That is in spite of the fact that they netted 4 past United, City and Spurs on occasion. The defence was seriously leaky at times this year, and Chelsea had almost twice the expected goals against versus other Big Six teams than Arsenal and Man City, who have set a really high defensive bar. And it feels like big matches may be to blame for Pochettino's downfalls this season. So let's go into a few of those so-called big matches, but this bit is a little bit less evidence-based and more of our opinion if we're honest. So Chelsea 4, Tottenham 1. Spurs lost that game rather than Chelsea winning it. And to be quite frank, it was embarrassing how long it took Chelsea to lead against a 9-man team with a defensive line higher than Nicki Minaj. Chelsea 4, Manchester United 3, the Cole Palmer show was fantastic to watch this year, but this match was ripped right out of the Friends dialogue where Ross and Chandler are arm wrestling, and I can confirm that in this case, both sides were equally weak. It was like a competition to prove who could collapse harder with the leakiest defence. Our conclusion on tactics then, Pochettino didn't seem to have an ambition to play a certain style, shape or tempo this year. He just didn't sell himself as a philosopher, nor a motivator, nor a trophy winner when Chelsea needed him. So how do our full set of results stack up then? Well, for motivation we gave Poch the benefit of the doubt really, but we had to score against for total points won at some point, so we started out at 2-1 in favour of Poch out. For experience and cohesion, we think Poch had a good backing of his full team of emerging talents. We registered that City have more than twice the amount of peak talents available than Chelsea, and that this was a significant factor in the performance deficit. And we gave 2 points in favour of Poch in, given the experience matrix analysis. We added a further point as well to Poch in, given the fact that Chelsea just couldn't get game time together this year, fielding the same starting 11 on only 3 occasions. For injuries and recruitment, we don't blame Poch one iota. For tactics though, we do have to pin it on the head honcho. He just couldn't find his system, his starting 11 or his impact subs soon enough. And when it came to the Carabao Cup final against Liverpool's GCSE sitting Cloplets, there was never a doubt in my mind that we were going to become that £1 billion bottle job that Gary Neville so aptly tagged us with. So were Chelsea right to part ways with Pochettino? Well, our analysis would suggest no, but only just. It's a fairly close call. But what would you have done if you were in charge at Chelsea? Do you think that Poch deserved more time? And how long do you think Maresca is going to last? Let us know down in the comments. Oh, and Mr. Bowley, if you are watching, I am available as a freelance data analyst. I will accept a Chelsea season ticket as prepayment, and when we have expired all other options, I will accept the head coach position. Okay, thanks for watching until the end, guys. Hope you've enjoyed this one. As we said, we're going to revisit this sort of thing in the future, and we're going to be back with a summer rebuild for Chelsea next. Until next time though, my friends, adios.